I just wanted to welcome everyone, say hello, and welcome you to tonight's discussion on getting to know wetland birds and ways to protect them. I'm Kate Jankowski. I am the co-chair of the St. John Naturalist Club that sometimes operates under social media as Nature St. John, so you may have heard that as well. Before I get started, I just have a few housekeeping items to share with you. One is the speaker has asked that we put any questions in the chat for the Q&A at the end of her presentation. We can also unmute you during the Q&A if you prefer to ask your question out loud. Just raise your hand using the buttons in the spacebar below. I'm just curious if anybody has seen any recent sightings. Um, I don't know. I've been looking for robins. I haven't seen one yet. Uh, I'm looking over the Cancasus River because I live along the river. I do see many bald eagles sitting on the ice, which is interesting because they're not where the water breaks through. So I'm now wondering what they're doing because they'll sit out there for hours. So they're not fishing or looking for food, but maybe they're enjoying the sun on the ice. I just was curious. Oh, someone has seen something. I'm looking for robins. Oh, you had robins off Manchester Avenue, Susan. That's amazing. Send them over here. I'd like to see one. Red-winged blackbird this weekend in Lornville. Oh, so people are seeing robins. Lots of robins. Oh, that's really cool. I'm gonna really look out for them then.
I
They're
had a barred owl outside my house last night.
really.
Yes, and it was very vocal.
Oh, I was going to say, how did you know? Like, was it dark? You couldn't see him, or was he making lots of noise? So that
No, it was loud, going all night.
that's really cool. Thanks, Julie. It's nice to know spring's coming and the birds are migrating north. Um, so the land acknowledgement, I just want to do a land acknowledgement. The land on which we gather is traditionally unceded territory of the Wolastoq, whose ancestors, along with the Mi'kmaq and Passamaquoddy tribes, signed the peace and friendship treaties with the British Crown in the 1700s. So, hmm. Oops, sorry. So what we do monthly meetings. We meet every third Thursday of the month, and our programming committee works very hard to bring you varying topics of interest. Nature walks is something that we started last year. Julie, our program director, who saw the barred owls, just finished a series of walks about winter birding for beginners, which was met with so much excitement that she was pleased to do and host not only once, twice, but three times. So it was quite a turnout, and it was encouraging to see that. Once the ice thaws, we'll be doing our weekly walks in different areas of our community. So that will be posted on our website. Be sure to check that. We also do workshops. So check the website for any workshops or any ad hoc things that we come across that we find that might be of interest. There might be some special events this year we're working on. Hopefully will come through to fruition. So please check our website often. Um, So our projects. So we have a few projects. The Greenlaw Mountain Hawk Watch is a strategically located hawk migration monitoring station in southwestern New Brunswick. If you haven't been out, especially in the fall time, to see the hawks migrate, it's a really special day. I encourage people to do it at least once. The Point Lepreau Bird Observatory is a globally significant seabird migration monitoring station in southwestern New Brunswick. We are in our 31st season, pretty proud of it. And the spring season runs until May 9th. If you want to get involved in that, we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The monarch butterfly conservation is a tagging operation for migrating monarch butterflies traveling south in the fall time. But we also do milk seed collection and dispersal for the public for milkweed planting to encourage the monarchs to come to our area. The Shorebird Conservation and Education Project is a project that educates the public about protecting shorebirds that are on the beaches prior to migration. Also, a shorebird consensus is conducted through the course of the project. If you want to get involved in any of these projects, even if it's, a few hours or, to do some observatory counting or over a period of time, check our website or contact us to get involved or to learn more. And don't be afraid to talk to us. If you call us and say, I'm not sure I'm interested, we're happy to talk to you about it. Um, we're trying to encourage involvement. Membership. So please be sure to sign up for your membership if you haven't already. Also, in the past, membership has renewed automatically. However, we're changing our policy for a couple of reasons. Our insurance company has reviewed our policy, and all our members and guests will have to sign insurance waivers for events going forward. And members will be asked to sign the waiver at the time of membership, which will cover them for the year. So it makes our administration much more streamlined. It's not something that we have to check to see if you signed it for each event that you attend. More importantly, in the past, we honored family memberships, but we never really knew who our families were. Someone would sign up for a family membership. We didn't know if it was a mother, father, and two children, or, a single mother and a child, or a single father and a child. And so when we were asked a few times by, Nature NB from New Brunswick, for example, how many members we had, we were like, we don't really know. So we thought that's something we should know, but also it came to light that maybe we need some programming that is sort of age appropriate or for younger people to get interested in nature or based on family involvement. But we don't really know what age group to target because we don't really know what is comprised in those family memberships. So, and they're forever changing. So, it could be we're a family of four this year, but then someone went off to university or moved out of town or whatever. So that no longer applies. So we just really like to get a handle on how many members we actually have so that we can target our offerings specifically. So if you haven't signed up for a membership, please do that. It really helps us out to understand who we're working for. Okay. So please check out our new volunteer opportunities page. We recognize that volunteering may be perceived as the vast unknown. People are afraid to say, hey, maybe I have some time or I'd really like to commit, but feel that maybe they're going to get sucked into a vacuum. We're honestly very friendly, a bunch over here. So we've created a list or a kind of job list so that you'd be able to find something you wouldn't mind volunteering for. And not everything is a huge commitment. So some of our needs are a few hours of time, and others are much more. So, if and then somewhere in between. So if you have some time to give, please check out our link and see if there's something that you'd like to do to help nature around us. This feels a little like self-promotion. I have to be honest. The podcast was my idea, and I am the podcast host. But we started our podcast late in November, and we broadcast on the 20th of every month with new topics. Have a look at the past topics and please subscribe so that you don't miss any future ones. If you have any ideas for the podcast, please contact me because I'm always looking for people to interview or to speak to. Because we want to get a vast variety of topics out there. But as a podcast host, I have to say. I'm finding it really interesting and I'm certainly learn a lot. And we have so much knowledge in the people around us. It's inspiring. So check out our podcast. The Hummingbird is coming out tomorrow at the 20th. So that's exciting. Upcoming events. So registration for events is available on our website. On March 28th, we have Deer Island with Suzanne Monell, and as of this morning, all our spots are accounted for. So if you're still interested, You could be put on a waiting list if something opens up, I guess, tomorrow. Logistics for this trip require more planning as there are only so many cars that fit on the ferry. So it's important that we're not oversubscribed in registration. That's why registration is necessary. On April 11th, the coastal birding excursion with Suzanne again in the Mesas Bay area is happening. And on June 20th is our AGM. We're doing a lot of exciting things in the club. I think the club is very dynamic in the executive and our strategic planning committee, and we have a lot of improvement to share with you. So please come out and share your time with some fellow enthusiasts. And you might even win at our guessing game or our trivia spot. So we plan to make it a fun event. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I don't see any. So I'm just going to go on. Please allow me to introduce our chair of the program committee, Mary Salos, who will introduce your speaker.
Thank you, Kate. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Gwendolyn Clark. Gwendolyn is the Marsh Monitoring Field Coordinator at Birds Canada. She manages wetland bird monitoring and citizen science initiatives in the Maritimes. Gwendolyn holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Science in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from the University of Toronto, and she has over 6 years of experience in scientific research and conservation biology. Since joining Birds Canada in 2024, Gwendolyn has worked across multiple roles. In her first year, her work focused on helping to identify and protect critical habitat for the threatened chimney swift. More recently, she has expanded marsh bird surveying in the Chignecto region, contributing valuable data on bird distributions and habitat patterns in this ecologically sensitive area. So tonight, Gwendolyn is going to share with us the importance of wetland habitats and the unique bird species that depend on them, and introduce two Birds Canada citizen science programs that are helping to improve our understanding of breeding bird populations in wetlands. So please welcome Gwendolyn Clark. And Gwendolyn, I will get you to turn your camera and your audio on, please.
Thanks so much, Mary. I just want to confirm that you're only seeing my slides and nothing else. Are we good?
We're good.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that introduction, Mary. And I'm so excited to be here with you all to talk about citizen science and marsh monitoring in the St. John region. So, of course, I want to start with land acknowledgement. So, Birds Canada's Atlantic programs operate on the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoq, Mi'kmaq, and Besgotamugari peoples. At Birds Canada, we are committed to approaching bird conservation using two-eyed seeing, or eduabdamup. This principle combines the strengths of Western science and traditional Indigenous knowledge to achieve a more holistic, sustainable approach to the challenges facing birds in the region. So the projects that I work on involve collaborations with several Indigenous communities and organizations, including the Wolastoqey Nation in New Brunswick, Fort Folly First Nation, and the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. Our work benefits immensely from the inclusion of Indigenous voices and knowledge, and we are honored to collaborate with communities across the region to advance bird conservation. So I imagine that maybe at least a few of you are familiar with Birds Canada and what we do, but for those of you who have never heard of us, we are a nationwide nonprofit organization dedicated to bird conservation. And our vision is that all bird species thrive in Canada in healthy and diverse habitats. So we have a ton of different projects across the country and here in the Maritimes. You may have heard of our national programs like the Breeding Bird Surveys or the Christmas Bird Count. We also have Atlantic programs like Maritime Swift Watch and the Atlantic Piping Plover Survey. So a ton of really awesome, cool projects to advance bird conservation. So today we're talking about wetland bird monitoring. So I wanted to start by talking about wetlands themselves and why they are so important. And so the first question is, what is a wetland? This is a term that you've probably heard, but you may not know exactly sort of what the definition is. So wetlands are ecosystems that are periodically or permanently flooded with water, such that they are transitional habitats between water and dry land. The flooding lasts long enough to produce poorly drained soils and support vegetation and wildlife that are adapted to a wet environment. So here in the Maritimes, we have both freshwater and saltwater wetlands. The freshwater wetlands include marshes, bogs and fens, and swamps. And these different types of wetlands are differentiated based on the levels of water drainage, the amount of open water that there is, whether there is any decomposing organic matter, also known as peat, of course, the different types of vegetation and nutrient conditions. Saltwater wetlands are almost all salt marshes. So these are tidally influenced wetlands. So they flood twice a day, and this means that conditions are fairly harsh, so you get a unique community of organisms that live in these coastal wetlands. So why are wetlands so important? And the answer is because they perform essential ecosystem services. This is a very nice diagram from the Government of Ontario that shows you just a handful of the ecosystem services that wetlands can provide. So in this first category of regulation, wetlands facilitate lots of abiotic, so non-living ecosystem processes. Wetlands essentially act like sponges, soaking up water, storing that water, and then slowly releasing it into waterways and into groundwater stores. So the benefits of these sponge-like properties are flood and erosion prevention and water purification. So as the water sits in the wetland, bacteria and other organisms break down any contaminants. Wetlands are also important carbon storage sites. So through the accumulation of decomposing organic matter like peat, and also through the large amounts of vegetation that grow in these wet environments. The second category is provisioning. So wetlands provide a lot of food and medicine for us. A good example is American eels use coastal salt marshes as important habitat, especially as adults. And they've been an important food source for the Mi'kmaq here in the Maritimes for a very long time. Of course, there are lots of edible plants and medicinal plants that grow in marshes as well, like cranberries, cattails, and sea lavender. And then wetlands also are culturally important. So they are gathering places and places of spiritual significance. They offer lots of recreational opportunities, birding, obviously, but also canoeing and fishing and kayaking. They are often important for local identity and stewardship. So I want to recognize the Treasured Wetlands program from Ducks Unlimited Canada. It recognizes wetlands across New Brunswick that are culturally significant. And Saints Rest Marsh, which is right down where you all are in St. John, is one of those treasured wetlands. And then wetlands can also have spiritual significance. So the Indigenous people often have deep connections with their local wetlands. And so the Wolastoq is considered to be a teacher by the Wolastoqiyik people. And then the final sort of category of ecosystem services is supporting, and this is providing habitat and resources for plants and animals. So Canada has actually 25% of the world's wetlands. It's a very wet country. And these wetlands support over 600 different species. And organisms use wetlands in a ton of different ways. So there are wetland specialists. They spend their entire lives in these habitats, like muskrats. There are also generalist aquatic residents, so wood turtles and kingfishers can live in wetlands, but they can also live in other wet environments like rivers and lakes. And then you have seasonal inhabitants that only use wetlands for certain times of the year, certain parts of their life cycle. For example, the spring peeper is a frog that breeds in wetlands but does not spend the rest of the year there. And so, of course, because I work for Birds Canada, my focus is on the wetland birds. And wetlands have adapted, birds have adapted particularly well to living in wetlands. So they have diversified to occupy all of kind of the available ecological niches. So what that means is they're using all of the little micro habitats, smaller habitats within the wetlands. They're using all of the possible diets, nesting areas, and so on. So we have, for example, waders that spend all their time moving through shallow water, hunting, frogs and fish. And they have these spear-like bills that they use to catch their prey. We have fish eaters that catch fish from out of the air. So ospreys and kingfishers. And a cool fact about ospreys is that they have a reversible outer toe, which gives them a much better grip. Once they catch a fish, they can hold it much more strongly. Shorebirds are the birds that you find on the edges of wetlands where there's kind of exposed mud. They like to eat little invertebrates and prey items along the shores. And we have waterfowl that occupy kind of the surface of wetlands, ducks and geese. So you can have dabblers that eat vegetation and other food from the surface or just below the surface. And then also divers that go down to the bottom. And of course, songbirds are the most diverse group of birds in the world. And so, of course, there are songbirds that live in wetlands, like swamp sparrows, and you find them typically in the vegetation. So all of these are what I would consider kind of wetland birds, in that you can find them in wetlands. And then we have this mysterious category of the marsh birds. And the marsh birds are a very diverse group of wetland breeding specialists. So they're known for being super shy and secretive, but very vocal. So these are birds that like to hide in dense patches of vegetation and just sing or call their little hearts out. So examples are like bitterns and rails. So delving a little bit more into the different groups, starting with the bitterns. This is a group of secretive herons in the genus Botaurus. So you can tell that these are herons because they have these thin dagger-like bills that they use to spear their prey, and they have long necks and long legs. But unlike some other herons that we get in the Maritimes, like for example the great blue heron, bitterns rely on crypsis, so in other words camouflage. So their coloration is very drab, mixture of browns, whites, and blacks. And as you can see from these pictures, this kind of helps them to blend in with the reedy marsh vegetation. And behaviorally, they spend lots of time standing perfectly still, or sometimes they'll sway a little bit back and forth to imitate the movements of the reeds. And if they get startled, the American bittern in particular will stand straight up, stretch as far up as it can, and stick its bill into the air. And when it does that, it is trying to convince you that it is a cattail or a reed. Now, here in the Maritimes, we have the American bittern and we also have the least bittern. The American bittern is a bit drabber and much stripier than the least bittern. The least bittern has a little bit of cinnamon coloration, and it also has a dark cap and back. But the biggest difference between these two species is size. So the American bittern is roughly between a crow and a Canada goose in size, so not a huge heron and not a really small heron. It's actually definitely a lot smaller than the great blue heron. The least bittern is really tiny, so it is the smallest heron in the world. It's barely bigger than this starling that I have here for comparison. You can see you can just hold it in your hand. So if you are lucky enough to actually lay eyes on one of these bitterns, you're probably going to be able to tell the difference just based on how big the bird is. But I say if you're lucky enough, because these birds, they don't like to show themselves. They are almost always hidden in the reeds, so the best identifying feature is their calls, which are often described as booming. They're very low frequency, and this is so that they can carry long distances through dense marsh vegetation. So the call of the American bittern can carry for over a kilometer. And the American bittern sounds a little bit like water sloshing or almost like burping, and hopefully it's going to play for you all now. So hopefully you heard that. It's a very bizarre noise, and it's very deep and sonorous. And the least bittern has a higher pitched call because, again, it's much smaller, so it can't make as deep of a call as the American bittern. It just stays on one note, and it's kind of a faster pace. So it sounds like this. So basically, any kind of deep booming call like that is likely to be a bittern. Our second group of marsh birds is the rails, coots, and gallinules. So this is a family of plump, kind of chicken-like, semi-aquatic birds. So they have super long toes, which you can sort of see in the Sora picture on the slide. This helps them to not sink down into the mud. That's where they like to hang out, kind of muddy edges of marshes. We have 5 species here in New Brunswick. The American coot and the common gallinule are not super common here. They're more common further west in Canada. The yellow rail is nocturnal, so it is very rarely detected. To give you a sense of how rare it is, in the Second Maritimes Breeding Bird Atlas, which is a 5-year project, super intensive survey of the entire Maritimes region, only 2 calling males of this species were detected. So very, very rare. You're unlikely to come across it. But the Virginia rail and the Sora, you are likely to find in your local freshwater wetland. So the Virginia rail is kind of cinnamony colored with a gray face and an orange bill that is kind of long and thin. And you'll notice that its bill is a pretty different shape from the other cousins in its family. And this is because it likes to probe for food rather than picking food off of surfaces like the other rails. The Sora is quite distinctive, kind of flashy almost. So it's got this gray undersides, a gray face that contrasts with the brown back. It's got a black face mask and a sort of candy corn-like bill. So it's bright yellow and kind of shaped like a candy corn. Now, you may lay eyes on these birds. They're a little bit less shy than the bitterns, but you're still more likely to hear them than see them. So their calls are, again, very distinctive. The Virginia rail sounds a little bit like a pig grunting or oinking. And that clip is a great example of the fact that they can be quite agitated as well. And the Sora has two different calls. So it has a descending whinnying call, which is how it communicates with its mate. And then it has a two-note upward scoop, which is its mate attraction call. So again, these are very different calls from the bitterns. You're not likely to get them confused, much higher pitched and super distinctive. And then we get this kind of miscellaneous group of marsh birds. They all come from kind of different families across the bird tree of life. So we have the black tern, which is not super common here in New Brunswick. We do have a few breeding colonies. It's more common further west. And it is an interesting tern because it's one of only 4 terns that breeds in freshwater marshes. The marsh wren is an adorable little songbird with an upturned tail. It has this beautiful liquidy song. And then we have the pie-billed grebe, which is a tiny little grebe, very compact, with a black and white bill. And it kind of sounds a little bit like a monkey. And you can tell they like to go on for a while. And then we have 2 salt marsh specialists here in New Brunswick. So the willet is a fairly large shorebird. So you can tell long, thin bill, drab coloration. It does have these distinctive black and white wing bars, which you can see when it opens out its wings. And these are very territorial birds, so they form monogamous pairs during the breeding season, and they are loud, and their call sounds like a pill-will-willet, which is where the name comes from. So they can be pretty frantic, especially when they think another willet is encroaching into their territory. And the other salt marsh specialist is Nelson sparrow. So this is actually a very beautiful sparrow. It's got this lovely orangey flush to the face. And this is my favorite song of all the marsh birds. It sounds like bacon hitting a hot pan. It's this insect-like hiss. Yes, that is a bird making that noise. It's probably the most distinctive sound that you can hear in a salt marsh. So you might imagine that because these birds all use similar habitat, they might have similar population trends, but actually there is a lot of variation in terms of how marsh birds are doing. So some species we are seeing strong increases, like with Virginia rails, and other species are really not doing very well, like the American bittern. So in a report that Birds Canada released a couple of years ago in collaboration with Environment and Climate Change Canada, it found that for wetland species, 35% of species increased, 30% were stable, and 25% decreased over the last 50 years. So it's very difficult to tell just based on whether a bird is a marsh bird or not, how its population is doing. And there are also regional population differences, and a really good example of this is Nelson sparrow, which has 3 distinct subspecies that breed in different regions of Canada. And so when we look at the interior subspecies that breeds in the prairies, the population is substantial and generally stable, but it is threatened by agricultural development in the prairie pothole region where it uses freshwater marshes. In contrast, when we look at our Nelson sparrow, the Atlantic subspecies, this population is small and vulnerable, and it's threatened not only by agriculture, but also by sea level rise and coastal development. So it's in a much more precarious position than the interior subspecies. And so regional differences like this are why regional monitoring efforts are crucial for conserving these species. And we at Birds Canada rely a lot on volunteer programming. But it can be quite daunting to think about volunteering, especially if you're not super comfortable with identifying wetland birds, marsh birds, which is why we created our educational program, Marshwatch. So Marshwatch is an introductory program that teaches the identification of common wetland birds and amphibians by sight and sound. So it consists of 5 learning modules, which are posted on the website and the program's YouTube channel. You can access them whenever you want and watch them as many times as you want, and it's totally free. So you can really customize your learning experience, and it's very accessible. And then we complement this independent learning with guided walks throughout New Brunswick so that you can practice your newfound identification skills. So we're hoping to head out to a marsh in St. John at some point this year. And the goal of the program is for participants to gain the skills and the confidence to be able to go to a wetland of their choosing and submit a checklist of all the birds that they saw and heard in that wetland. And the ideal timing for this would be June or July, when the birds are most vocal. So in terms of the content, the first learning module is an introduction to the program and the wonder of wetlands. So what I talked about earlier, but in much greater detail. And then the other webinars are identification sessions. So for each one, we look at 6 to 8 bird species, so a total of 30 birds across all of the learning modules, and 1 to 2 amphibians for 5 in total. And we give you all the tips and tricks for identifying them by sight and sound, where you can find them, so their habitat preferences and distribution, and of course, a bunch of fun facts thrown in there. And a couple of the learning modules also have plant ID tips, which is useful if you then go on to join our marsh monitoring program because we have a habitat survey component for that. So the species that we cover in Marsh Watch, we have them organized by similar species in the different learning modules. So we cover the 12 primary species for the Maritimes Marsh Monitoring Program, which are the main marsh birds, the marsh specialists that we find here in New Brunswick. And then we also cover 18 of the most common species that we see recorded on our marsh monitoring surveys. So these are generally common species for the maritime region. Most people probably have seen them before, even if they didn't identify them by the species. And the amphibians that we cover are the 5 most common frogs and toads in the Maritimes. So if you are interested in Marsh Watch and you want to take a look at our resources and the learning modules, all of that is available on the program website. So the URL is there on the screen. You can also just Google Maritimes Marsh Watch and it'll come up. Nature Counts is where you can submit your data. Of course, that will also be linked through the website. And if you have questions, comments, concerns, you can always reach out to me. And just a note that this is a fully bilingual program, so all of the resources are also available in French. Now, if you are more confident with your marsh identification skills, or you go through our Marsh Watch program and you think you're ready for a level up, a bit more of a challenge, then you can think about our Maritimes Marsh Monitoring Program, which is a volunteer-driven population monitoring project that is focused on marsh birds. So the way it works is participants survey a route or routes of their choosing, and each route has up to 10 stops. Usually it's about 5 or 6. So this satellite image here on the slide shows you an example of a route in our program, and each of those dots is a stop on the route. At each of those stops, participants conduct a 15-minute point count. So basically you just stand in one spot and you observe and record all the birds that you see in here in a 15-minute period. So it starts with 5 minutes of silent observation, and then there's 5 minutes of playback observation where 30 seconds of the call or song of each of the 5 species listed there is played, followed by 30 seconds of silence. And this is to try to encourage those birds to announce themselves, because otherwise they would be content to just sit there and not be detected at all. And then the point count ends with another 5 minutes of silent observation. So if it sounds a little complicated, don't worry. We have an audio tape that you download from the website. It's 15 minutes long, so all you have to do is press play at the start of the 15 minutes and then record the birds. The timing of the surveys, they can start as early as 30 minutes before sunrise, but they do not have to. That's only necessary if you're doing a route like the one on the slides, which is long and takes a long time to complete. So for the most part, you can start your survey a little bit later, as long as you end by 10 a.m. And each route is surveyed twice per year, 14 days apart, in the month of June. This can be extended to July 15th if you have scheduling issues or the weather doesn't cooperate. But just know that these marsh birds tend to go silent by about the beginning of July, so they're much harder to detect after then. So for the primary species, which are the species that we're really interested in monitoring, each individual is recorded every interval that it is seen or heard. So here's an example of a data sheet. And you can see for this particular point count, there are 2 different soras that were detected. And so they each got their own line, and each of the X's is a time that it was seen or heard. So fairly straightforward. And so the primary species, just to remind you, they are the 12 marsh birds that we get here in the Maritimes, bitterns, rails, and those 5 other miscellaneous ones. For secondary species, which are any species that is not a primary species, we have kind of a simplified protocol. So for each 5-minute interval, the maximum number of individuals per species in a 100-meter radius is recorded. So you can see an example there on the slide. All of the data from the program goes into our online database Nature Counts. This is an example of what it looks like when you're inputting your data. It is fairly straightforward. All the columns are there. You just sort of have to keep track of making sure that the primary species and the secondary species are inputted correctly. And so the habitat survey is only done once per year, and we recommend that it is the 2nd or 3rd visit so that you're already comfortable with the route. And it involves 4 required sections, which are just collecting basic, very simple habitat information, like what type of wetland it is and whether there are any human modifications. Sections E and F are optional, and so they're just if you want to give more information on the plant species available or present at the point. So, and we conduct the habitat, we measure the habitat for the 100-meter radius, same as the secondary species. So why is the Marsh Monitoring Program important? It allows us to track secretive wetland species, which otherwise we would know very little about these species. And the data contribute to understanding long-term population dynamics and species habitat preferences. And all of this information helps us to determine what conservation actions we need to take. So here in the Maritimes, all of the data are forwarded to the Atlantic Canada Conservation Data Centre, or ACCDC. They manage a database of over 3 million records of species occurrences. And so organizations, governments can pay a small fee and gain access to these data. So I've listed here a few examples of conservation uses for these records. So things like classifying species at risk, protecting important areas, environmental impact assessments. So when there are development projects, determining whether it's likely to affect species at risk, and forest and wetland protection. So now I want to talk a little bit about the St. John River watershed specifically and what we've got going on there. So this is the Wolastoq or St. John River watershed, the orange outline. This is the largest watershed in Atlantic Canada, and it's dominated by a variety of riparian wetland and forest habitats. And these habitats support a lot of different species. And in particular, the Wolastoq watershed has the highest density of species at risk in New Brunswick, including some of the province's rarest species. So 37 terrestrial species at risk in total, and 84 priority bird species for the Bird Conservation Region 14. So essentially what this all means is that it's a super important biodiversity hotspot, and it's a place that rare species can find habitat that they can't find in other areas. So because of this, Environment and Climate Change Canada recognized the Wolastoq watershed as a priority place. And so the purpose of the Priority Place Initiative is to recover species at risk within the area. And I should note that the funding for this project is officially coming to an end at the end of this month, but the partner organizations on the project are going to continue working on the project in various capacities. So the marsh monitoring contribution here is that volunteers collect data on distributions and abundances of bird species, including any species at risk in the Wolastoq area. So in 2025, our volunteers detected 4 species at risk in the region: the least bittern, barn swallow, eastern woodpecky, and bobolink, and also 27 Bird Conservation Region 14 priority species. So again, this is crucial information for understanding how the Wolastoq region supports populations of these vulnerable species and where we need to protect land and direct conservation action. So this is a map of the routes that we have in the St. John and adjacent areas. So in green are the available routes. So you can see the red dots. We have some volunteer action, 1 volunteer in the St. John region and then up towards Oromocto. But definitely lots of opportunities to get involved. And so a lot of the routes are, you can access them by car or foot. We do have some canoe routes. So if you own a canoe and if you're very enterprising and you want to get out into a canoe to conduct a survey, it's a beautiful way to do it. But you don't have to do that at all. There are definitely many easier routes to access. And we're also looking at adding routes. So the purple dots are showing you potential locations that we've already identified for new routes in the region. And so what we're hoping to see for the St. John area is increased coverage of our existing routes. And then we also want to update our route database. It's been a while since some of these places were surveyed, so we'd like to get a sense of if any of them have become inaccessible and we need to remove them, and so on. And then we also want to identify locations for new routes, which is where you may come in, because we need people on the ground who have local knowledge. So how you can help, you can of course become a volunteer. That is ideal. So to register for the program, it's super simple. You go to naturecounts.ca/MMMP and you'll see a big red sign up button on the right side of the screen. And you just click that and follow the steps. Once you've registered, you can adopt an existing route very easily. There's a route map that you can access on the My Data tab under Available Routes or at the link that I've listed here. And all of the protocols and resources are available on our program website. So this is great if you have decided you want to volunteer or if you want to get a better sense of what the program entails. This is all very technology focused and can sometimes be a little bit tricky to navigate. So if you need any assistance with any of this, you can obviously reach out to us. Also, if you want to suggest a new route, again, maybe you have some local insight, you know of a really nice wetland near you that you think would be a good route, let us know. You can also report any issues with existing routes. And if you want to sign up for our mailing list, maybe you're not sure you can volunteer, but you like to be contacted when we reach out closer to the field season, we'd be happy to sign you up. So just send me an email. My email is there, gclark@birdscanada.org. And so with that, I want to thank all of our partners and supporters, in particular, Nature New Brunswick, Nature NB, our partner on Marsh Watch. They did a lot of the heavy lifting for the French version of the program, so we're super grateful for their collaboration on that. And with that, I am happy to take any questions, and I'll leave this information up on the screen. And also follow us on social media for any updates.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. I do see a question in the chat. It says, thank you for the presentation. You mentioned for those doing the surveys to note that the birds start going silent around the beginning of July. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's because by the beginning of July, they've definitely laid eggs and they may even have hatched young. So they are trying their very hardest to not draw attention to themselves. They've paired off, they don't need to attract a mate anymore. So a lot of the sort of functions of their vocalizations are no longer necessary, and then predator avoidance.
I have a question for you, Gwendolyn.
Oh.
I'm wondering, do you try to pair inexperienced people with people who have a little more experience, or are people supposed to just go out on their own once they feel they're trained?
So we generally leave it up to the participant. A lot of the time, what we see is that people do tend to survey in pairs or groups of 3. And so often it will be the case that one person is a super experienced birder and then someone else is maybe looking to get involved, but they're not quite ready to survey on their own. So we're perfectly happy to have that be the case, but we don't have a formalized, system where we can pair you off.
How has the response been to date from other areas?
In terms of our engagement in the program, this year was our biggest year in a long time. 2025 was our biggest year in a long time. So we had 30 volunteers in total, and that was across New Brunswick, and also we had quite a few volunteers active in Nova Scotia. So we're seeing a really exciting trend of more and more people joining the program. And I will say we're kind of ramping up after COVID curtailed a lot of things. Now we're making a push to expand the program. We've added lots of new routes, and we're seeing a lot of people getting excited and getting involved.
That's good to hear. I think you'll probably have some people who are interested from this group. There is another question in the chat. It says, for the 4 species at risk, why have their numbers changed? Are they going elsewhere, or has their environment changed, or something else?
That's a very good question and quite a complex one, because we're talking about 4 very different species there. So barn swallows and eastern wood pewees are what we call aerial insectivores. So they are birds that grab insects out of the air, essentially. And what we're seeing with those species are habitat loss, use of insecticides, climate change. These are all factors that are leading to declines across that group of birds. Also, chimney swifts are in there, nightjars are in there. So for those ones, we're pretty sure what's going on. In terms of the least bittern, it's a little bit less clear. And actually, we got some good news recently about the least bittern, that the population numbers have stabilized enough that this species is being kind of downgraded, if you will, from being threatened to being special concern. So things are going in the right direction. Generally, we're thinking it's also sort of habitat loss is what they were struggling with the most. And then for bobolinks, I mean, the main thing is agricultural development there because they are meadow specialists. So they will nest in like hay fields, for example, but what we're seeing is the earlier the hay fields get plowed, it's threatening their ability to complete their breeding cycle.
I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. You have provided an email address, and so it's if anybody does have some pertinent questions, then they can get in touch with you. And give you all a couple of extra minutes here to while I thank Gwendolyn. But if you do have some questions, put them up on the chat. And I know I will be going back to revisit this this presentation because you covered a lot of really interesting things. And thank you for that introduction that led up to the marsh monitoring program. That is very helpful. Right from talking about the complex ecosystems in wetlands and the burping bitterns and the little Nelson sparrows with their bacon frying, was it? Bacon sizzling?
Yes. Yeah.
So I love your description. Thank you so much for sharing, and we wish you the best of luck with this program, and hopefully we'll have some people participating. Thank you very much, Gwendolyn.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for coming.
And to everyone else there, I see lots of applause coming up on the screen. But thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight. And don't forget to check the St. John Naturalist Club website for upcoming events and lots of information on memberships. So thank you, Gwendolyn, and thank you, everyone. And we will close the meeting.